Okay.
Hey, everybody. Josh Neighbors here. Locked On Big 12 podcast. It is the 3rd of January. I messed this up the other day, 2023. Joining us today is Stephen Simcox of Locked On Horned Frogs to discuss TCU headed to the national championship. What does it mean for the school? Can the Frogs pull the upset once again against the Bulldogs? There's a lot to get to coming up on the show. As always, we hope you all enjoy.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast, joined by Stephen Simcox of Locked On Horned Frogs. Make sure you guys subscribe to both Locked On Big 12 and Locked On Horned Frogs, wherever y'all get your podcasts, and on YouTube as well. You guys can find me on Twitter at LOBig12. Find me personally at Josh Neighbors _. You guys can find Stephen at Stephen Simcox or at Simcox Stephen on Twitter. And then the show is at Locked On TCU, I believe, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Finally got that one correct. All right, Stephen, you and I talked last week. Now we were talking your Frogs. You're an alma mater, you're an alum, excuse me,
Right,
at TCU. Yeah. You cover the team, sure, whatever. But like, as an alum, how does this feel? Just give me the TCU alum side of this equation.
It's pretty surreal. It's not like they haven't been close. I mean, in the BCS era, they knocked on the door a few times. They were undefeated that Rose Bowl season, beat Wisconsin. Were just on the outside looking in. In 2014 and 2015, they had some teams that seemed like they were capable of doing this. But the timing is just insane. I mean, they were 5-7 last year. When I've been on the show the last few seasons, we've sort of been discussing like, okay, is this the end of the Patterson era? Where do they go from here? Is this sort of where we see a possible downturn for the program? And so the fact that they've just revamped this whole thing and gotten really close to the mountaintop in year one is pretty amazing. I mean, I don't know how I'll feel on Monday. I'm already pretty nervous about it. I've digested more content than I typically do when we've only been, 2 or 3 days from the game. We got 6 days till game time as we record this. So it's a huge deal. I mean, TCU is a school that I jokingly said this, I think, when they made the playoff. They don't necessarily want to be the Ivy League. And what I mean by that is like they just want to be good at athletics. They're committed to it. The student population, the fan base, they care about these things. They're invested. And so it's a huge deal. It's a big deal to a group of people that often feels like they're kind of overlooked within the landscape of college football and college sports. And I mean, when they held on and, hearing the no targeting call on after the review was one of the better things in TCU history, because it meant that this team was headed to the national title game, which is a place that I think even some of the most optimistic TCU fans weren't sure if it was possible to get there.
Yeah, what's crazy is you can turn around college basketball teams very quickly now with transfer portal. You can turn around college football teams pretty quickly with the portal. I think a lot of us talked about Mel Tucker, right, and the job they did, and Baylor did a little bit of that. But I mean, we saw the Dave Aranda, big turnaround, 2 wins to Big 12 championship. This one was different because it was 5-7 legendary coach gone. Right. New coach comes in who's like, it's not like Sonny Dykes has this unbelievable winning pedigree, right? It's not like this is, this is some consummate winner, all the time. Like the Cal thing didn't go very well. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, but he comes in and takes over generally the same roster. I know. And we talk about, at safety and linebacker, two obviously really important players for TCU are both transfers, but this being generally the same group that had that disappointing 5-7, whose best player last year is on Ole Miss now and is now head of the NFL, and Zach Evans, and was very mercurial, didn't play sometimes, did play, injuries and not injured, whatever. And now they're here. It's not Cinderella. It's not really what it is. It's just very particular, I guess. We say the word unique too much, but this is a very specific circumstance of really all of these things coming together. And I think why I focus on the coaching and whatnot, like this group really, really had to buy in for this to be possible. And it's so difficult to do when you have a new coach coming in. And, a lot of these guys, like, I don't think Sonny Dykes and company cannot have been the only ones who could have seen some levels of potential from these guys, right? I mean, if some of these guys hit the portal, like they could have gone some pretty good places, but many of them did not. I think part of that was they had a chance to play at TCU for sure, right? Because there wasn't a massive turnover with the portal and whatnot and recruiting, and also buy-in. And so I think that's, to me, is like really where it starts, is like Sonny Dykes nailed these coaching hires, and the coaches nailed the message to the players.
They did, and it's a really good point you make, because I remember in the offseason, so yeah, Zach Evans hits the portal almost immediately. O'Shawn Mathis and Kyrie Coleman left, which on paper, that's a lot of production. I mean, those are your two best pass rushers from last year, and then your most productive offensive player in a lot of ways. But then nobody else really hit the portal during the offseason. And I think some TCU fans noticed that and were like, well, that's a good sign. But it was sort of like, okay, well, they were 5-7 last year, so it's good that they're buying in, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're about to take off. I do feel like, though, and listen, I hate to, like, I was tough on Gary towards the end, and some people think I was a little too harsh, but I firmly believe this. I think for a lot of those guys, and it's not all his fault, but it just wasn't really fun. Like the football experience was not fun anymore. And so Dykes coming in, coaching personalities, it's always kind of really comes down to whether you win or lose. But I just feel like he and the staff were such a 180 from the previous regime and how they let the players be themselves. And it was a lot more relaxed and laid back. And so it really was kind of a breath of fresh air, and a lot of guys bought in. And along with that, there was some more discipline that got brought in. Like they talked about, fine-tuning these nutrition plans and revamping the strength and conditioning program and getting them in an off-season program that's going to be more productive and better about injury prevention and those kind of things. So there was all that coinciding. And yeah, it's funny, like Ari Wasserman, who covers football for The Athletic, and I know Bud Elliott talks about this too. Like there's always this discussion about blue chips and can you compete? And so it's kind of being challenged right now with TCU, because based on the talent composite, I think they're ranked 32nd in the country.
Right.
And so the refrain that started to come up is like, well, they just really hit it hard in the transfer portal, which they did. But like, look at the transfers they got. I mean, it's worked out. I mean, Johnny Hodges is a really good player for them, but he's from the Naval Academy. And his story is that he sent emails to every FBS school, and the only responses he got were TCU and Northwestern. Mark Perry started a lot of games at Colorado, but it's not like the national media, when he transferred to TCU, was like, oh boy, TCU just landed Colorado's top safety. Right. Like here we go. Alan Ali, who's their center, was a transfer from SMU, and it was just sort of like, oh yeah, that makes sense. He's going to come over from where Sonny Dykes was, and he'll plug in and he can start. But what I mean is, like, none of these guys are huge names. It's not like they were.
None of the skill players on offense, like, who talk about, like, were like immediate transfers. I don't think. Like, are any of those guys? And I don't think about who is a tight end that came.
Oh, they got
Texas.
Jared Wiley.
But that was that this year? I'm trying
to. That was this year. But they don't even really use him much.
They don't use him. But you and I lamented how much they don't even use Jared Wiley enough, right? So it's like
really
the guys that we talk about all the time are not guys that were, that they brought in the portal.
No, it really is the same cast of characters. And that's been one of the incredible things, is that they've just found a way to kind of make it happen with the guys on this roster. We talked in the offseason, like the big question was going to be, is this defense even like, or could they even be passable? Like, can they just improve enough that they can maybe outscore some teams? And, they gave up 45 points to Michigan at the end of the day, but they still made a lot of big plays and stepped up in a big way in that football game. And yeah, it's going to be a hard blueprint for other people to replicate, because there have been a lot of things that have fallen into place. Like this year in the conference, Oklahoma went through a rebuilding situation. Texas is still, trying to kind of climb that mountain of getting back. Baylor and Oklahoma State took a step back, but all that being said, like, they took advantage of their opportunities. They got to the playoff, and now they've won a playoff game. And so it's in front of them. Like, it's going to be a huge test with Georgia, but they've done it all in the span of one offseason. And it's just wild to think about, because this is not even a team that was like, oh, they were 5-7, but 3 or 4 plays go their way, and they're 8-3 or 9-4. I mean, they got blitzed by Oklahoma State, by K-State.
We're talking about how aimless they were, because they lacked the identity, right? Like that was the big thing about how they lacked the identity. I'll tell you this: Joe Gillespie, I thought did the best coaching job of anybody. And look, you talked about how many yards they gave up, sure, but like you take away that first run, the team, they were fantastic. And I'll tell you what, man, Horton has had himself. At that position, you need your tackle in a 3-3-5 to be able to disrupt. And he has just been absolutely on fire the last 2 games. He had a good season, but I think 6 sacks in the last 2 games, and he's causing all kinds of problems. And that's, to me, that's kind of what opened stuff up for the linebackers. I mean, they were running fitting essentially perfectly besides that one play. Between the tackles, I would love to see what the numbers were after that one play, because it felt like it was, that rushing game between the tackles, Michigan really didn't go away from it, right? The kind of window dressing stuff they did, the stuff they schemed up was all in the passing game, right? Yeah. It was all those play action passes, the flea flicker they had. It wasn't a whole lot of run game. That's what ends up beating TCU on defense at the end of the day. And I thought Joe Gillespie knew that, look, we're going to make McCarthy play quarterback and beat us. And I think those 2 critical mistakes that you mentioned were the keys. And so while it was 45 points, I still felt like he was the best coach in the field and really made them go to plan B and C to beat TCU in certain ways, because they couldn't beat him with plan A.
You're totally right on. I mean, like the all the talk about the 3-3-5 and, managing the run game. But I think those offensive linemen for Michigan, because they were sort of in this offset formation, like a lot of times they were confused as to who to block. And by the time they figured it out, those linebackers and safeties were coming up and making those run fits, as you said. But yeah, the adjustment they made, they started picking on the safeties, honestly, and throwing the ball over the middle of the field off that play action. And J.D. McCarthy made some great plays. Those receivers from Michigan had a much bigger game than I thought. But yeah, I came away super impressed too. I know they ended up giving up a lot of points at the end of the day, but I think part of that too was just the chaotic nature of that game. It sort of got out of hand for, especially that third quarter. It was basically like just trading scores, trading big plays.
That was. But mentioning the line, sorry, I meant to say Horton coming off the edge, and they got obviously Williams, a freshman, to play the nose tackle spot. Like the game of their lives, sure, but like it was just like they felt like they did this to Bijan Robinson when they needed to, right? They did this to Texas. Now I know Michigan's offensive line's a bit of a different case, but like the fact that they've been asked twice now to defend against a lot of times between the tackle, and Texas will do some different stuff, but the fact they're able to do that twice in the games they really needed to, and the games, and mind you, the 2 games where they were 7.5 point underdogs, right?
Right.
It's funny. There's the 2 games they were big dogs. They do the same thing twice, and I think that defensive line deserves a ton of credit.
They do. Dylan Horton is another one of those players. Like, he's going to get drafted, I think, and that was not something that seemed possible going into the season. And yeah, I didn't foresee in my mind that ultimately, like late in that game, the adjustment they made was just, okay, we can get pressure with 3. So we're going to drop 8 or 9 guys back and just we're going to stop blitzing, stop being aggressive because they keep beating us over the top. And we're just going to make McCarthy pick apart the zone. And he couldn't really do it. Like, he was getting enough time, but the coverage was good enough that like that secondary pressure was starting to get to him. They have stepped up in a big way when they had to. And so now you got a whole nother test. But as far as like passing the physicality test that they had to do against Michigan, they did it with flying colors, which I don't think anybody really expected that going into the football game.
So now you turn your attention to Georgia, right? Complete. They're kind of somewhat of Michigan, but like it's a much different challenge of beating Georgia. And here's what I'll say. They've had a lot of moments this year where they have not been impressive. I go back to the Missouri game, a large portion of the Florida game. They were not impressive. A large swath of that Kentucky game on offense, they were not impressive. But then you think about whenever and then obviously we go back to that there is a long time in the Ohio State game, they were not impressive, and reasons we'll discuss here in a second. But they are much like TCU. Whenever it is asked of them to come up big, Tennessee, they were like this. We put our foot down. This is still the East still runs through Athens, Georgia. LSU game, they were tested there for a little bit. It got a little close, and they just absolutely beat the hell out of them at the end of that game, right? And then they needed the rally, and they got the rally. And, whether it be, Kirby Smart calling that timeout before the fake punt, whether it be Stetson Bennett coming up big and all, all those things, a missed kick, and then the run play at the end that Ryan Day calls that people debated, whether it was the right call or not. I mean, this is a team much like TCU that is finding a way, or knowing when they have to, get down to brass tacks is their specialty. And I think that's kind of the scary part for TCU. Like this, that's the thing, is Georgia is just as good at responding as TCU has been this year.
They are. And I think the other aspect of it is, I don't really know what's going on with Harbaugh right now. I know there's the NFL rumors out there too, but that Michigan team, they just looked like they weren't expecting a dogfight.
They were horribly prepared. That was horrible. They were horribly prepared for a game they had a month to prepare for.
They were. And Kirby is he's like Nick Saban. He's obsessive about the details. They're coming off a slow start against Ohio State, so I don't expect that to be the case. The couple of things that interest me about this, one is this Georgia defense. Like on paper, I think they match up pretty well because they can rush the passer. They got Ringo on the back end who should match up with Quentin Johnston fairly well. And then, they stopped the run at a decent clip. But the last couple weeks, that LSU game, LSU was able to move the ball on them a little bit. Ohio State, CJ Stroud played outstanding, but they score 40-plus points. So can this TCU offense – and, Josh, sometimes you just kind of get beat over the head with something enough, and you're like, okay, this is who they are. Like, I finally decided after the Michigan game, TCU just makes – they're just an explosive play team. They're not going to do – they did this in the first half, but they're not going to do the 10-play drive, 7-play drive for all 4 quarters. It is just okay, 75-yard pass to Quentin Johnson.
Right.
Amari DiMercado's 65-yard run. Another long pass to Quentin Johnson. That's just sort of their DNA. So they're going to take those deep shots. Can they connect on a few of them against Georgia to kind of even up this football game?
I think they can, though, especially against Ringo. I mean, look, Marvin Harrison Jr. might be different, but it's not like Kelee Ringo's not going to be guarding. It's not it's a first-round talent. It's Quentin Johnston. And I mean, we just saw him take that, this is what makes him so special. He takes that design, kind of what I guess it's a screen that they run to the inside there. He broke one. It was curtains. That was the end of the play. And if you don't commit more than one guy and you get beat, you think just take him in man coverage. We've seen it time and time again. It's not going to go well for you. And so I think you're right. LSU moved the ball really well on them at times, right? Ohio State did. I think the big question is how repeatable do you feel like some of the Ohio State stuff is?
Sure.
With TCU. Now, I will say the good thing is TCU's offense is naturally, like you mentioned, explosive. Mm-hmm. And then it gets the other part of this too. And Amari has been explosive, yes, but Kendre Miller, it sounds like he's, definitely not going to practice this week, right? Which is absolutely massive for TCU.
Yeah, that's a huge deal. And he looked as good as he has in about a couple months when he was healthy in the Michigan game. I think at this point, it's really impossible to expect him to have a full workload. The issue is Amari's a good running back, and he can handle the rushing attack. But then behind him, Trent Battle's a guy that they haven't used him at all in the traditional running game. It's mainly just kind of throwing some swing passes out of the backfield. Amani Bailey's a guy that showed some good bursts, but all his playing time has been in garbage time, when they're up big. And so that's a huge ask to be like, hey, can you tote the rock 10 times against Georgia in the national title game? So I think they need something from Kendre. I don't know if he can give them 20 carries, but could you give 5 to 7 and just at least give DiMercado a spell and give Georgia something to think about? But that is a huge aspect of it. And then the other thing is, I think we talked a lot about these other weapons for TCU. If Ringo does do a nice job against Quentin Johnson, I expect Quentin's going to get his at some point. But Tay Barber, Darius Davis, Gunnar Henderson, Jared Wiley, somebody has to be the secondary piece that makes Georgia pay, because that's what Ohio State's got, that deep receiver room.
We didn't hear from Savion Williams. He had a pretty quiet game against Michigan. Did a good job on
his title game. Another name to know, he's a true freshman, and so I don't think a lot of people had them on the radar. Jordan Hudson had some big catches in that football game. Yep. He's somebody they're really excited about, and as the year's gone on, you can tell they're kind of more confident and saying, okay.
And they went to him late in the Baylor game, if I remember some too. I think they got him the ball. I think it was.
Yeah, I got him the ball. They threw a couple deep routes to him against K-State, just trying to change things up a bit. So they've got some opportunities. And then on the flip side, defensively, and I'll get your thoughts on it, Josh. The guy that just terrifies me is Brock Bowers, because the safety and linebacker play, linebackers in coverage for TCU and safeties in coverage, that's been an issue at times. Michigan exploited that. I don't know exactly how you slow them down. I mean, I think like Hodges, Tomlinson, and Newton, Georgia's receivers are really good. They're much better than Michigan's. I feel like they can at least hold their own on the outside. It's really the middle of the field. Can you find a way, to contain that? And then can you get some pressure on Stetson Bennett? But again, like this defense, they're not going to shut people down. Aside from the Texas game, this is not a group that holds people to 10 points, but they just kind of have a way of getting big stops and keeping themselves in the football game. And I think if they can just give the offense opportunities to score and keep it close, then maybe they'll have a chance here at the end to steal one from the Bulldogs.
Well, it's forcing turnovers will have to be another thing that they're going to have to do that again. Yeah. But I'll tell you what's interesting with this, and this is actually a frustrating thing maybe for TCU. They might go deep some, and they have at times. The advantage for Georgia is not – they do not have – and I actually think Stetson Bennett throws a pretty good deep ball. That's not – they don't have that kind of skill level at wide receiver. Mm-hmm. Like, if you think about the guys that are, like, really good for them that they have, I mean, Bowers, McConkey's not really a deep guy. Kenny McIntosh has 42 receptions in the year, so that's a guy they love to use in the passing game. Darnell Washington, right? Like, this is – and I don't think he played in he's questionable for the championship game. So that'll be – if he's not playing, that's a huge, huge plus for TCU because there's nobody that can handle that guy, generally speaking, right? I mean, he's a gigantic human being.
Sure.
But like if he doesn't play, that'd be massive. But yeah, I think it's the one thing is like, all right, I know Joe Glass is probably all over this. What's a way that we can use our corners, our skill at corner? Because I thought Michigan beat them a lot up the seam and in the slot. It didn't feel like there were a ton on the edges where you're hearing about Newton and Trey Hodges-Tomlinson getting beat a lot. I know Trey had a couple PIs, but like that's who he is. He's an aggressive corner, and I think that's what makes him such. I mean, I thought he played a really, really, really good game. So is there a different way in which you can use those guys to help out if you're like not overly concerned about the vertical passing? And look, we saw a couple of them, right? They hit some big ones they needed to late in that game, but like Georgia doesn't want to be chasing they're not going to be chasing the game again. It feels like. Right. So is there a way that you can use those corners, deploy them differently to maybe try and fool Stetson Bennett or maybe even use them, corner blitz and whatnot? Because I think actually they had one or two of those the other day.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point because, Trey, he was targeted some and he did have those PIs. He didn't end up actually giving up a catch based on like the Pro Football Focus,
he's freaking awesome. I mean, he's unbelievable.
And then Josh Newton, like I saw this on I just happened to see it on Instagram because he posted about the game. They didn't target him at all. So
right.
Like, they just weren't even – they just gave up. They're like, no, we're not going to throw to those guys. We're just going to work the seams. And so if Georgia has a similar game plan, yes, can you find a way to kind of cheat there to give them some help and maybe force them to take some more targets to the outside? But, yeah, you're right. I mean, Georgia is more of a team that's going to get up and down the field on a consistent basis, move the chains. And so can you find a way to get this pass rush going? And then, the other thing that surprised me about the Michigan game, the Wolverines started blitzing and Max helped the O-line out a little bit because he's really good at kind of drifting away. But I thought that was maybe the best, like from a pass protection standpoint, that might have been the best game the O-line's played all year. Like
he did a great job picking it up. He saw it all. Max saw everything. He was on top of everything in that. There was nothing he wasn't ready for in that game.
No, he was prepared and he was kind of moving around the pocket. He made some nice step ups and drifting back and made some throws. But, I was concerned about Coleman and Coker, those two tackles, but they held up pretty well. So a different animal with Georgia, but if they can, not get killed with sacks and pressures, then this offense has some room to work and maneuver.
Yeah. The one question is, because Georgia, the one knock on Stroud was if you heat him, he's this is a lot of guys, but Stroud was like, if you heat him, he's a lot worse. And I actually think that's been the knock on Max too. Max had a lot of that. Now, Max is a better playmaker than Stroud is, generally speaking. I know CJ was fantastic the other night, but over the course of his career, Max has been a bit better. I feel like at least eye test tells you that. Georgia's one thing, though, is that they've started doing it more, but they don't bring a whole lot of pressure, right? They don't blitz a ton. I'm wondering if that's still going to be the game plan because they trust their guys. I'm wondering if they'll start off not blitzing a lot and then think, all right, we're going to have time to make an adjustment. We want to start sending some pressure we can. I tend to think that they might try to heat Max up early. I think they might try, because here's the thing is, like, you mentioned some of those teams that have carved them up just a little bit. And I thought LSU was that second half. I mean, that was not a game. And all of a sudden it was, because LSU was moving the ball all over them. I think they got a fourth down stop. Georgia did. They kind of put it to bed, kind of stopped the rally. But you could, Ohio State did too. You can move the ball all over this team. And so I think they want to get on that from the start. Think about the games where it really didn't go well. K-State did a good job, I thought, of it. And also Texas did an excellent job of that early on in the game. Was it 4 or 5 sacks in the first half? So I think that's the key. Michigan, I didn't feel like it was really creative about where they're kind of bringing it felt like there was a lot of stuff out the middle. Like the backs had no problem picking up those blitzes, it felt like, for TCU. I mean, they were well prepared and everything. So my question is, does Georgia have the advantage as a team that doesn't blitz a whole lot of being able to show some looks that's really not on tape, because that's not really what their MO is?
Well, and I can see them doing that too, because, the misnomer about TCU offensively is people think because it's a Big 12 team, they're just like, oh, they're small. But their O-line is huge. Like, they're really big. The issue the O-line has is they're not super athletic.
They're not fast. Right.
Yeah, they're not fast
at all.
So, like, when teams heat them up, it's hard sometimes for those guys to move laterally and drop their hips and get to the spot. And so they did a better job against Michigan. But I could see them for sure trying to, heat Max up and cause some negative plays. And they might have to come up with a new beater for that, because I think the shallow screen might have run its course. They ran it twice in that game against Michigan, and hey, they got their money's worth. They got 2 touchdowns out of it, but I don't expect to see a full all-out blitz.
Oh, could you imagine if Kirby gets beat? If they get beat on that, he is going to absolutely lose. But that's the thing, is like, that's what their team has done for a long time, is they keep everything in front of them. That's really good. That's really what they do well, and so I think that's going to play to their advantage, because TCU, a lot of times, like, they want to get stuff behind you or draw up stuff that will end up being behind you, right, like we talked about. So, I mean, this is a fascinating game. And look, there is a world where this definitely ends up being Georgia, dogs TCU. Like, it's totally obviously 13-point favorite. Like, that is there. But I will say this: TCU, like, they live in like hell, basically. Like, they just want it to be a heart attack game. They need it to be there. They always end up there. And so that's why I was like, man, that's why they kept giving the lead back. I was like, this is where they live. Every time they had to score, they're pushed, they responded. And so, like, I just feel like it's going to be a closer game, just because, like, that's where TCU lives. That's kind of how TCU football works this year.
You're totally right. I mean, like, I could listen, blowout's possible, right? But I think even if Georgia's up like between like 14 to 17 in the fourth quarter, TCU will score some dumb touchdown, and maybe like they'll at least like force maybe a third down that Georgia's gonna have to convert. Like, I do think this is what they do. They play close football games. They love them. They're all about it.
They put you through hell. That's what they do.
They make you just keep going on the emotional roller coaster. It's the Michael Scott scene in Dinner Party, where he's like snip, snap, snip, snap, snip. It's just back and forth, back and forth.
We are due for a blowout. That is one thing, right? I mean, the because we just had 2 close games, which
we had 2 great games, yeah.
Right, so we were due for a blowout. I will say this: because I've watched Georgia a decent amount this year. They can be beat. They are an excellent team, and I think the resolve of this group is actually a little bit better than last year's was. I think they've showed that a whole bunch. Like, whenever Stetson sucks, they always overcome it. He also always usually plays really well in the second half of those games. So I think we're all leaning Georgia. But can TCU win this game? Yes. I mean, they could definitely win this game. And that's because this year, I really don't think I don't think that the teams this year are as good as the teams last year were. I think with Michigan's pass rush you'd probably say they're better last year than this year. I think Georgia's team, obviously, from an overall perspective, was better last year because of that defense. Alabama had a few more weapons, last year that we were talking about, and whatnot. And so I think that the top teams are a bit down compared to last year, which I think gives TCU a pretty clear shot. They can definitely win this game. Like, there's no doubt in my mind. I would not be shocked if TCU I'd be shocked as a season as a whole. Yes, it'd be a shocking result, but like we're here and we put it down to one game. I would not be shocked. Would you agree with that?
No, I wouldn't be. I mean, I wouldn't be floored at this point. I'm kind of done not believing in them. Like I've been waiting for the shoe to drop all year long. Sure, maybe it does on Monday night. I don't think anybody would be like surprised or super disappointed if it did. But hey, they've answered the bell every time. And Josh, this is the grittiest QB battle we've had in a while?
Oh my
Stetson
God.
Bennett and Max Duggan.
These two guys, I mean, like you want to talk about like not like we're not Get Up is not going to be talking about them for the 3 months that Get Up does their draft coverage. It beats me over the head. It's not going to be like Stetson Bennett. Where is he going? Right. We're talking about like 6 and 6, 7 and 5 Will Levis. Yeah. And being like, where's the big white guy with a good arm going to go? They're not going to say, where's Max Duggan going to go? Where's Stetson Bennett going to go? But it's pretty ridiculous thing about this, Stetson Bennett with a chance to win a second national championship. Sure. And it'll be like, will he get drafted? Right? Like that's going to be the conversation around him. But yeah, I mean, this is about as gutsy and gritty as it can get between two quarterbacks in a national championship game, nonetheless. Right?
It is. I think there's a writer for Texas football. His name's Ishmael Johnson. He had a really funny tweet. He said, we're going to have a moxie off in the national title game between these two QBs on Monday.
The adjectives that the broadcasters and people like, these guys are just gritty, gutsy.
The lunch pail championship.
It's going to be a whole lot of those buzz white guy words that you hear a lot of the time, which are like always just hilarious whenever you hear them. All right, Steven, where can people find you in your work and talk about, all the coverage you're going to have this week?
At Simcox Steven is the Twitter handle. At Locked On TCU is the show handle on Twitter. And then subscribe to YouTube. We're getting close to 500 subscribers, so we'd love to get to that before the national title game. Josh, I think you got to 3K, right? Before 2023? All right.
3K, yeah.
But still subscribe to Locked On Big 12.
I appreciate you. Now, and you and I have had got to have a lot of conversations recently, which is actually the nice part of this TCU run, right? We've been able to keep having them. I'm sure we'll have one next week as well. But yeah, make sure you guys follow Steven. Make sure you guys follow me at @JoshNeighbors_. You guys can find the show at LO Big 12. You guys can find the podcast, both podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, and please subscribe. Steven, go Frogs. I'll talk to you next week. Let's hope we get the Big 12 and TCU in a national championship.
Sounds great.